My name is Eric Homeland, and I've been a friend of Jack and Carmen and Dustin and Eli's for quite a while. Jack's tribute, because it obviously would be difficult for him to read this, but before I read Jack's words, I just wanted to remember some of the early times that Kim and I spent tagging along with the Drury family on a couple of their hikes. We hiked with them up Azure Mountain, I remember, and then a time we went with them bushwhacking up Wright, I think, went up the slide on Wright. And, Kim, probably several others, wherever Kim is, several other trips. And from those hikes, we realized that you actually could bushwhack with young kids through the Adirondack Mountains, and we learned a little bit about what it's like to raise a family up here in this amazing wilderness. So we took some notes from you folks and had some great adventures with you. We appreciate that. I'm going to read excerpts from Jack's amazing tribute to Eli, and if you hadn't had a chance to read this, it is on the Facebook page. There are a few copies inside, and I'm just going to read a portion of it because it's a little too long for this, but it's well worth reading in its entirety. A Father's Tribute. Eli was named after a distant relative of mine, Elisha Kent Kane, who was an Arctic explorer. While Eli never became a wilderness explorer, he certainly was an explorer of a different kind. He explored the world, he explored spirituality, and he explored ways to feed people. As I have learned over the last 2 months, he had a memorable impact on those around him. It is a terrible thing to lose a child, but I take some solace that he did make a difference in his short time with us. As a young child, Eli was a great kid. He was polite, fun-loving, affectionate, curious, and cautiously adventurous. He had a quiet self-confidence that I admired. He had only one serious flaw. He was ruthless toward his younger brother, Dustin. His mother and I encouraged him to be a better brother and frequently disciplined him for his poor brotherly behavior, and nothing seemed to have any real impact. I guess it proves that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, because I was the very same way toward my younger sister, Carol. When adolescence arrived, Eli's personality changed dramatically. The cheery kid took on a sullen attitude and seemed to thrive in the alternative culture. For his parents, he was a real challenge, but his closest childhood friend once observed, Eli never changed deep down. He was still the same old Eli. He was looking for something, and in time, he found it. Eli was particularly disillusioned with the local school district, so I offered him the opportunity to try a year at a private school. To his credit, he jumped at the opportunity, and while it didn't provide exactly what he was yearning for, it did turn out to be a worthwhile experience, with him meeting students from a variety of countries and opening his eyes to the world around him. I remember him commenting about the school on the ride home at the end of the school year. He said, "How can you love a place and hate a place so much at the same time?" He soon hit the road, traveling cross-country, and eventually found the spiritual path with Krishna consciousness. It proved to be the right path for Eli. As he told me once, I couldn't leave the destructive lifestyle behind without help. I needed the guidance of a higher power. It was with the guidance of Krishna consciousness that he cleaned up his act, found his passion, which was spreading the word through food, and met his wonderful wife. I will be eternally grateful to ISKCON for these 3 things. I visited Eli some 20 or so times in different parts of the world, from Maine to Florida, Columbus, Ohio, to London, United Kingdom. I got to see him in his environment. The 3 visits stand out. The first was in London in 2004. I met him in London when I stayed in a temple once owned by the former Beatle George Harrison in the London suburbs. We traveled together over to Oxford so he could visit the Oxford Center for Hindu Studies. He had set up a meeting with the director, and I was pleased when I heard the director ask the same question I had been asking him. What do you want to be doing, and where do you want to be in 10 years? I was impressed with Eli's ability to find his way around the countryside, and also with his computer expertise. He was self-conscious about his lack of a formal education, but his colleagues laughed it off. One of his friends had a master's degree in computer science, and he said to me, "I have formal education, but it's all theoretical. Eli knows more about using technology than I do." The second visit was in New York City in 2006. We drove down to spend time with Eli at a Krishna festival, and I think it was the first time I felt he was actually excited about our visit. And why? Because he had a lady friend he wanted us to meet. An attractive woman in traditional Indian dress approached Phyllis and me on the edge of Central Park and said, "You must be Eli's father." I responded, "How did you know?" She said, "Eli said you had a red beard." Bear in mind, I hadn't had anything but a gray beard for a number of years, so you can understand how she immediately made a positive impression on me. Phyllis and I immediately fell in love with Mandalay, and I was so happy to see two young people madly in love. As an adult, I never saw Eli happier. He was just beaming the entire time. Unbeknownst to me, to us, they were married a short time later. I'm going to skip ahead here. Saying Eli's death has been a painful shock is an understatement. I don't know anyone who wants to outlive their children, and the pain of losing Eli far surpasses all of the life's previous worst moments combined. But my favorite story demonstrated Eli's compassion as well as his business acumen. A colleague told of Eli making plans for the Burning Man Festival, which I think is in Southern California. Oh, it's in Nevada. Eli had decided to rent a refrigerated tractor truck to keep all the produce fresh. The Krishna kitchen only needed about half the space, but Eli figured he could pay for the rental of the entire truck by renting out the remainder of the space. Vendors rented the footprint of a wooden pallet and could stack their produce up to the ceiling of the refrigerated truck. It was working out well, except one vendor accused the Krishna kitchen people of stealing a case of melons. They threatened not to pay the rental fee. Eli was compassionate, telling them that the Krishna kitchen staff had not stolen their melons, but offered to contact the produce company and see if they could track the melons down. He also demonstrated his business acumen by telling them that if they didn't pay the rental fee, that was okay too. He would have the rest of the produce immediately taken out of the cooler and left in the hot desert. I learned a lot about Eli in that short story. I'll wrap up this piece with a description of our ceremony on the Ganges River the day before we left India. I quote from my journal for that day. "Today's the day. Not much sleep last night. Got up and showered, and I put on my yogi pants and Indian shirt. I'm sad, but ready." As we look out from the third floor, we see a small crowd gathering and starting to chant. There are a number of swamis and priests attending, but Carmen and Dustin and Mandalay and I are the guests of honor. We have a procession of about 50 people who make the 15-minute walk that exits the compound, heads down the road, and over to the Ganges River where a boat awaits. It is an old boat. It starts with a hand crank. It's the kind that you imagine makes headlines when it capsizes and all aboard drown. The chanting continues as we load the boat. It is surreal. We head downstream a bit to what I believe is a large sandbar or island. Maybe it is the far shore. We get out and the driver goes back for another load. Eli's friends lead the chanting while we wait in the warmth of the sun. I only know a small portion of the people. The priest, an Australian I believe, starts the ceremony. There is a round straw tray about 18 inches in diameter. They line it with a layer of river mud. Mandalay pours Eli's ashes onto the tray, along with some ghee, honey, and sesame seeds. Carmen, Dustin, Mandalay, and I cover the ashes and nourishment with more river mud. Carmen's brother, Nityo, a longtime devotee, takes the ashes out into waist-deep water. There are many spoken words of which I understand none, until they say out loud in unison, Nitai Das. I say out loud, Elisha Kane Drury. At one point I break away and walk down the stream to collect some water of the Ganges as a keepsake. I can't get George Harrison's songs, All Things Must Pass, and My Sweet Lord out of my head. We make our way back to the mainland and convene in a spacious room where we are served a great meal of prasadam, which means holy food. That is an interesting mix of traditional Hare Krishna food and an Italian pasta dish. It turns out that Eli had a soft spot for Italian food. There are opportunities for more eulogies, and it is poignant to hear the young people tell about how Eli touched their lives. I speak with great difficulty, but my message is simple. When our children are born, particularly our firstborn child, we have dreams and aspirations for them. It has taken me a long time to realize that those were my dreams. While those dreams and aspirations are worthy, you have to let go of them and realize that the important dreams and aspirations are not yours, but your children's. Because of my dad dying when I was 17, I never, as an adult, got to know my dad. Now I realize that I never really got to know my son when he was an adult. It is a sad realization. The eulogies go on for a long time. Finally, near dark, emotionally drained, we head back to our room and prepare for our return home the next day. I am currently reading a book about the Canadian far north. I've paddled up there a couple of times and have come to love the region and hope to return someday. The book by Rob Kesselring called Daughter, Father, Canoe is about a 200-mile voyage the author took with his 14-year-old daughter. I was fortunate to have gone on many camping trips and outdoor excursions with Eli as a child, and a particularly memorable 2-week canoe trip when he was 18. I think you heard about that. It wasn't always roses and sunshine, but I'll cherish the times together. In Kesselring's book, he makes an observation that seems pertinent. Here's the observation. How do you let your children know how much you love them? Can they understand their quirks, vulnerabilities, and mistakes make them even more deeply cherished? Our lives pass like the flash of a falling star. A little zap of energy, and then we vanish. All that lasts is what we pass on to our children and those we love. I look back at my letters to Eli and I see that I certainly tried to tell him how much I loved him, but I'm not certain the message was received. For good or bad, I was one of the few people in his life that showed him tough love, more times than I'm sure he wanted to receive it. One of his friends said that Eli was a Pied Piper of sorts. I've learned that this is true. I was one of the few people that said no to him on a consistent basis. Even though the message was consistently wrapped in words of love, I am not sure, given the context, that he heard it. But then again, I'm not sure that any child hears it until it may be too late. I'm sure he heard it, Jack. I'm sure he did. Thanks again for your thoughts, prayers, and support over the past couple of months, Jack. I got to say one more thing. Before, I think Dustin wants to say a couple things. Seems like rivers have been running through a lot of these stories today, and we're on the banks of a very beautiful river that you probably paddled with Eli a couple of times. And I know I've paddled this river. Our good friend Moss McCurdy has set up an opportunity to do a devotion at some point later in this gathering. He's got some pieces of birch bark and some ways to write on this birch bark, and I guess it's down by the river. And come on up.
I thought we'd do it after the slideshow.
Okay. Well, he says after the slideshow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you can talk about it now.
Great.
Okay.